They call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a prison so fortified, even the guards say they feel locked in, where sunlight touches concrete for less than 1 hour a day, where men disappear into silence so deep they forget the sound of their own voices. Inside these walls are the inmates America doesn't talk about: terrorists, cartel bosses, spies, assassins, men too dangerous for regular maximum security prisons. But what happens when you trap the darkest minds on the planet? In the most secure prison ever built? Tonight, you'll hear the stories no one was ever supposed to tell. And trust me, once you enter ADX Florence, you don't come out the same, if you come out at all. Before we begin, take a moment to share, and subscribe, because what you're about to witness isn't just another prison documentary. This is a journey into the darkest corridors of America's justice system, a place where sunlight barely touches concrete, where the walls don't just contain men, they swallow them whole. Inside ADX Florence, the most secure prison ever built, exist stories so disturbing, so hidden, that even the guards who work here refuse to speak about them. Tonight, we pull back that curtain. We expose the secrets locked beneath 20,000 tons of reinforced concrete. We bring you the voices of inmates the world has forgotten, and the ones the government would prefer you never hear. So tighten your grip on reality, because once we enter this place, there's no turning back. Welcome to the Untold Stories of ADX Florence Inmates, America's most secure prison. The descent into ADX, the drive into the desert. 3 hours outside Denver, highway signs disappear. Cell phone signal vanishes. The landscape turns into an empty ocean of rock and sand. Drivers who've made this trip say the road feels wrong. Too quiet, too isolated, like it was designed to warn you to turn back. Up ahead, encircled by motion sensors, sniper towers, and triple fencing, sits ADX Florence, a prison built to do one thing: erase a man from the world without ever taking his life. Inmates say the moment the gates close behind you, it feels like the air gets thinner. But before we meet the men trapped inside, you need to understand something that most people don't know. ADX Florence wasn't built to punish criminals. It was built to break them. Architecture of control. Narrator: every inch of ADX Florence is a psychological weapon. Cells angled so inmates can't make eye contact. Showers built inside each cell, so they don't walk anywhere. Doors open remotely, so guards never have to get close. Even the windows, if you can call them that, are slits in the wall, just wide enough to see a patch of sky, never the horizon. Dr. Mackenzie, prison psychologist: ADX wasn't designed for escape prevention. It was designed to deprive the mind of stimulation. Isolation doesn't just quiet the brain, it rewires it. On paper, it's called administrative maximum security, but to the inmates inside, it's the clean version of hell. The first story, The Spy. Our first story belongs to a man known only as the Analyst, a former U.S. intelligence officer convicted of selling classified information. He arrived at ADX in total silence. No trial cameras, no press, no interviews. What makes his story chilling isn't what he did before he got here. It's what he claimed after. The Analyst, ADX isn't a prison. It's a laboratory. He described experiments, patterns in the air vents, echoes that weren't echoes, and guards who spoke to him without ever opening their mouths. Was it paranoia, or something else ADX was built to hide? We'll return to his story later, because another inmate's arrival would expose something far more disturbing. The cartel ghost, the man without a name. They call him El Fantasma. The Ghost, one of the quietest and most feared cartel assassins ever captured. Mexican authorities refused to house him. Federal prisons in the U.S. couldn't contain him. ADX became his final cage. What made him dangerous wasn't his violence. It was his silence. He refused to speak during interrogations, refused to react when sentenced, refused to acknowledge the guards at ADX. But after 6 months in solitary, his silence broke. He started talking to someone at night, but there was no one in the cell. We checked the cameras. He was alone. What began as whispers turned into full conversations, in Spanish, in English, in languages he never learned. And then he said something that made the entire unit freeze. El Fantasma. They're watching us through the walls. Not the guards. Not the cameras. Someone else. Someone he claimed lived inside the prison. The ones who never leave. The unit called DX. There's one part of ADX you won't find on official maps. DX unit. The most restrictive block in the entire prison. Inmates here get 23 hours of isolation, and 1 hour in a concrete yard the size of a walk-in closet. This is where the most dangerous stories come from, including the inmate the guards only call the Prophet, the ones who never leave, the unit called DX. ADX Florence was engineered like a nuclear bunker, but DX unit? This place is different. This is where the government places the inmates they want forgotten, not punished, not rehabilitated, just erased. No voices echo here, no footsteps, only silence. A silence so heavy it feels alive. Guards don't like walking this hallway alone. They say the temperature drops 6 degrees the moment you step inside, as if the building itself is holding its breath. Inside DX resides a man whose story still haunts everyone who met him, a man who claimed he could hear things no human should ever hear. The inmate the staff called the Prophet. The Prophet's first night. When the Prophet arrived at ADX, he had already spent years in isolation. Other prisons labeled him unstable, a man broken by the system. Yet the moment his restraints were removed, he did something none of the guards expected. He smiled, not at them, but at the walls. Guard Malone. Most inmates look panicked when the door closes. He just whispered, finally, like he'd been waiting for this place. Hours later, unit officers heard him speaking softly. At first, they assumed he was praying, but then they realized there were pauses, as if someone or something was speaking back. Guards reviewed camera footage. He was alone. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't hallucinating. He was listening. And what shook officers to their core wasn't the sound itself, but what he said next. The Prophet. They're louder here. Much louder. You built this place on their voices. The list. A week later, the Prophet requested a pencil and paper, something inmates in DX rarely receive. The warden denied it, so the Prophet began writing with something else. His fingernail. He scratched a list onto the concrete wall, one name at a time. Names of inmates, names of guards, names of people who had never stepped foot inside ADX, names he shouldn't have known. When guard confronted him, he only answered, the Prophet. They told me who's next. And the next day, one of the guards on that list collapsed, right in the DX hallway. No warning, no cause, no explanation. The story spread through the staff like wildfire, and the Prophet kept writing more names. The spy returns, the analyst connection. Remember the analyst, the ex-intelligence officer who claimed ADX was a laboratory? His story intersects with the Prophet in a way that still baffles investigators. 2 floors apart, no communication allowed, no interaction possible. Yet both men started speaking about the same thing, a message carried through the vents. The analyst, there's a pattern in the airflow, a rhythm. Someone is transmitting through it. At nearly the same time, the Prophet, they're speaking in the walls, counting us. Neither man knew the other existed, yet both described the exact same sound, a slow, rhythmic tapping, like Morse code, but older. Some guards claimed it was just pipe expansion. Others started hearing it too, just after 3 a.m., the same time every night. The 3 a.m. code. It became known among officers as the 3 a.m. code, a sound that traveled through every wing, yet couldn't be traced to any machine, pipe, or vent. Maintenance crews tore apart sections of the wall. They found nothing. Inmates began losing sleep. Some started talking to their walls. Others begged for earplugs. But the Prophet? He smiled. The Prophet. They're waking up. When officers asked who, he only pointed at the ceiling. El Fantasma's nightmare. The cartel ghost speaks. El Fantasma had been silent for years. Not a word spoken in prison. Not a whisper during interrogation. But the tapping, the 3 a.m. code, changed him. One night, officers heard him shouting in Spanish. Terrified, panicked. Something they had never seen from him. El Fantasma. Stop. Stop. They're behind the walls. They're calling your names. Cameras showed his eyes fixated on the concrete, as if something moved beneath it. He refused to sleep, refused to eat, refused to sit with his back to a wall. And when a guard asked him what he saw, he whispered, El Fantasma. It's not the prisoners you should fear. It's the ones this place was built for. The blueprint, that didn't match. ADX Florence is famous for being impossible to escape, but there's something else it's famous for, internally. A rumor the staff whisper about, when they think no one can hear them. A rumor about a place under the prison. That isn't on the maps. One former maintenance technician leaked a strange detail before disappearing into retirement. A blueprint with a sealed-off basement level, containing an unnamed cluster of rooms. When asked who used it, he answered, maintenance tech. Not inmates, not guards, not even the warden. The people who go down there don't wear uniforms. On official documents, this level doesn't exist. In reality, every inmate in ADX can hear it. The tapping, the nightly rhythm, the 3 a.m. code. It always comes from below. The night the lights went out, the blackout. ADX Florence hasn't had a full system power failure in its entire history, except once. At exactly 3:02 a.m., the lights flickered. The cameras froze, and for 7 full minutes, the most secure prison in America was blind. Guards scrambled to emergency stations. Backup generators engaged, but only powered half the facility. In DX unit, something terrifying happened. The prophet stood at his door, not panicked, not confused, but smiling again. The prophet, they're coming up. Then the tapping started. Not faint this time. Not distant. This time, it sounded like it was coming. From the steel doors themselves. Tap, 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 tap. Guards reported vibrations beneath their boots, as if the entire floor was breathing. And then, in the total darkness, El Fantasma began screaming. El Fantasma's final panic. His voice echoed through the hallways. Desperate, terrified, a man who had survived cartel wars. Broken by something no one else could see. El Fantasma. They're trying to open the walls. They're inside. He backed into the corner of his cell. Eyes locked on the concrete. Cameras captured something unimaginable. He wasn't looking at the door. He wasn't looking at the hallway. He was staring at the back wall, behind his bunk, as if someone stood on the other side. When the light snapped back on, he was silent, motionless, just sitting on the floor, staring straight ahead. And for the first time on record, he spoke to a guard directly, his voice barely above a whisper. El Fantasma. Tell them, you heard it too. The only escape attempt that ever succeeded. The inmate who vanished. ADX Florence has never had an escape, but it has had a disappearance. A single inmate, locked in a sealed, reinforced concrete box, with an automated steel door, controlled by a guard 50 feet away. No tools, no accomplices, no physical contact with anyone. And yet, one morning, he was gone. The door remained locked, the window untouched. No holes, no broken concrete, no signs of a struggle. Inside the cell was only one thing, a message scratched into the concrete wall. They opened it for me. His name was added to the missing persons list. His file was sealed, and the entire incident was classified. Even today, no one knows what happened, except perhaps the prophet. The prophet reveals a connected thread, the message in the walls. 3 days after the disappearance, the prophet requested a meeting with a prison psychologist. It was the only request he had ever made. During the session, he leaned close to the reinforced plexiglass and whispered, "The prophet, you built this place over something ancient, something that learned to mimic us. The tapping is not a signal. It's a heartbeat. The psychologist reported the conversation. Hours later, he resigned from the Bureau of Prisons, without explanation. Before leaving, he wrote a single sentence in his final log. The walls are not solid. The floor that breathed. After disappearance, everything inside ADX changed. Guards walked the halls faster. Shift rotations doubled. Maintenance crews were ordered to inspect structural integrity. But only two knew the truth. They weren't searching for cracks. They were searching for movement. Because for 3 nights in a row, inmates in DX and Echo units reported the same thing. The floor wasn't still. It pulsed, softly, like a slow, steady respiration. Most guards brushed it off. Poor construction, faulty ventilation. But to those who worked at ADX the longest, this felt different. Veteran guard Hawkins. I've heard pipes groan. I've heard concrete settle. This wasn't that. It felt like something underneath us was waking up. This wasn't just superstition. Sensors installed after the disappearance detected microvibrations directly below DX. They didn't match any system in the prison. In fact, they didn't match any man-made machine at all. The order from Washington. The visitors without badges. 48 hours later, a convoy of unmarked SUVs arrived at ADX Florence. No insignias. No agency logos. No briefing. The men who stepped out wore no ID. No name tags. Just plain suits and emotionless expressions. They met with the warden behind closed doors for exactly 27 minutes. Afterward, the prison entered what staff referred to as grave protocol, a procedure so secret. Half the guards didn't even know it existed. All security cameras below level 1 were manually disabled. Entire hallways were sealed. And for the first time ever, the warden activated the freight elevator. That led to the subbasement, a place no correctional officer had ever been permitted to enter. But one man was ordered to accompany them. The Prophet. The descent into the hidden level. Guard from B Unit later whispered about the moment the Prophet was escorted out of his cell. He didn't resist, didn't question. He simply looked up and said, "The Prophet, they already know you're coming." The men in suits brought him into the elevator, scanned a key card no guard had seen before, and descended far below the mapped floors of ADX. This was level 0, the hidden wing. No windows, no cells, no ventilation. Just a long corridor of reinforced steel doors, each marked only with a number. No names, no labels, no explanations. One guard, who later broke his NDA, described it as former guard. It wasn't a prison down there. It was a bunker, a storage place, like something had been kept there or was supposed to be kept there. At the far end of the corridor waited a door thicker than any in ADX, cold to the touch. No hinges, no handle, but it wasn't the door that haunted those who saw it. It was the sound behind it. Tap, tap, tap. Not random, not mechanical. A pattern, a code, a heartbeat. The door that was never meant to open. The activation. The men in suits placed the Prophet directly in front of the door. He stood perfectly still, head tilted, listening, and then he whispered, "The Prophet, they're trying to speak through me, through all of us." The suits exchanged glances. One of them removed a black case. Inside was a device ADX officers had never seen, something between a scanner and a detonator. When activated, the entire corridor vibrated, a low-frequency wave, almost imperceptible, except for one thing. The tapping stopped. For the first time in months, total silence. The Prophet collapsed to his knees, clawing at his ears, screaming, "The Prophet, you're hurting them. Stop. You're waking it." The men in suits didn't react. They only watched. And then the steel door shuddered. Once, then again, then violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. Lights flickered. Guards panicked. One shouted, "Guard! Something's pushing from the inside." No inmate was supposed to be down there. No living person. And yet the door continued to thud. as if enormous hands were slamming against it. From within the dark, then silence, dead silence, and a single sound, a whisper, voice, open, the shutdown. What happened after is still classified. What happened next remains one of the most heavily classified events in the history of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. All we know for certain, ADX Florence was evacuated above ground level. All inmates were locked in place. The Prophet was removed from the facility. The men in suits stayed behind underground. The warden resigned 12 hours later, and the official incident report was restricted under national security protocols. The tapping stopped for 5 days. 5 quiet days. Inmates slept through the night for the first time in months. Guards felt the floors return to normal. ADX Florence seemed to settle until the 6th night. At 3 a.m. sharp, the code returned. Louder, clearer, and this time it came from every wall in the prison. Simultaneously, the Prophet's final message. The Prophet was removed from ADX Florence and transferred to a location so classified, even his transport logs were erased. But before he left, he passed a message to the prison chaplain, a man he trusted, because the chaplain had visited DX longer than any other staff member. The message was handwritten on a scrap of food tray paper. 6 words. They are not below. They are around. The chaplain attempted to report it. The message was confiscated. He was instructed never to repeat it. But he did, years later, in retirement, when his nightmares wouldn't stop, and he described what the Prophet said next. Chaplain, he leaned close to the glass and whispered, "They don't live in the walls. They travel through them." When asked who they were, the Prophet smiled gently, as if pitying him. The Prophet, "You'll hear them soon, too." The analyst decodes the tap, the pattern no one should have solved. The analyst, the former intelligence officer who'd been breaking down the sounds in the vents, continued studying the nightly tapping. Even after losing access to ADX, he hacked into archived maintenance recordings, pulled confidential acoustic logs, analyzed vibration frequencies. At first glance, the taps seemed meaningless, random, chaotic, but after the blackout, something changed. The pattern was too deliberate, too structured, and when he slowed the audio to 1/5 speed and ran it through a spectral filter, he discovered something impossible. The tapping wasn't mechanical. It wasn't structural. It was vocal, not words, not language, but rhythm, cadence, as if something was trying to imitate human speech. Without vocal cords, the analyst converted the peaks and valleys into binary, then into waveforms, then into phonetic approximations. And what he decoded sent him into a panic so severe, his neighbors called emergency services because the translated pattern was repeating one phrase over and over and over. "Let US in." The new inmate, who already knew. Arrival of the silver-eyed man. 3 weeks after the code was decoded, ADX received a new inmate, a man in his late 40s. No priors before this arrest. No record of violence. Yet he was classified as extreme threat level. His name was Daniel Crow, but inmates called him something else. Within hours of his arrival, the silver-eyed man, because his irises had an unnatural sheen, not metallic, but reflective, like he'd spent years staring into darkness and learned to see something inside it. On his first night in ADX, before lights out, he pressed his ear to the wall and whispered a phrase no guard forgot. "Daniel Crow, you're louder here." He requested placement in DX. No inmate ever requests DX. Guards denied it. He smiled. "Daniel Crow, they'll bring me down soon enough." The night Daniel Crow stopped the tapping, the first confrontation, at 3:06 a.m., 6 minutes after the nightly tapping began, Daniel Crow did something no inmate in ADX had ever done. He tapped back, but not randomly. His rhythm was identical to the underground heartbeat. that had shaken the prison for months. The entire facility fell silent. Every inmate froze. Every guard stopped mid-step. Even the vents seemed to stop breathing. And then, from inside the walls, for the first time ever, a response. Not tapping, not scratching. A voice. Daniel. Crow stepped away from his door, as if greeting an old friend. Then he whispered, "Daniel Crow, I told you I'd find you. Lockdown 0, the full-scale containment. What happened next triggered the only full-scale lockdown in ADX history, a lockdown so severe. It had its own code name, Lockdown 0. Every door sealed, every camera disabled, every guard ordered to safe zones. No one was allowed to speak to the outside world, and Daniel Crow was transported to the underground level that didn't officially exist. The same level where the prophet was taken. The same level where something behind a steel door had spoken back. In the end, ADX Florence remains exactly what was designed to be, a fortress of silence, a place where the world's loudest men are reduced to whispers, and the voices society no longer wants to hear fade into concrete. These stories, the forgotten confessions, the midnight breakdowns, the human moments buried beneath steel, they don't make headlines, but they're real. They live inside these walls, echoing through every bolt, every chain, every shadow that stretches beneath a flickering light. And as we leave this place, we're reminded of a truth that's easy to ignore. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about humanity, or the pieces of it we decide are worth saving. Some inmates will die here. Some will vanish into memory. Others will remain ghosts, not of the crimes they committed, but of the person they once were, before ADX Florence pressed its fingerprint onto their souls. If this story shook you, if it made you question what happens behind the world's most secure walls, then make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to understand this reality, and subscribe for more documentaries uncovering the darkest corners of the justice system. Your support helps us tell the stories no one else dares to touch. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never stop looking into the shadows.